Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Those are the words of Jesus in Matthew chapter 11, verse 28. And it doesn't seem like it's always light for us, does it? Easy? Hardly. But we know this. Jesus wouldn't have said it if it wasn't possible. So over the next couple weeks, we're going to spend some time just talking about the effects of anxiety on our lives and how anxiety can rob us of the peace and rest that we know Jesus offers his children. And just to begin with, I'm going to let Kristen kind of get us on the same page with a working definition of anxiety.
Yeah, I do think it's often confusing to figure out exactly what anxiety means. So for the next couple of weeks, we're going to talk about anxiety as an excessive state of uneasiness or apprehension. Okay. Those things include rapid heart rate, they include restlessness, they include troubled breathing, labored breathing, and irritability. Sometimes it also includes difficulty falling asleep.
Mm-hmm. Now listen, I know some of you were thinking, oh, anxiety, that's not me. But the minute she said irritability, your spouse kind of punched you. So I know, yeah, that is one. I'm gonna tell you this. Compassion is not my soft spot. But with regards to anxiety, I can tell you, Sarah and I were on a flight back from San Francisco to Detroit. It was about 10 years ago, and I'd been around people that had experienced panic attacks and just anxiety, like you said, rapid heartbeat, heavy breathing. But it never happened to me, and I was always kind of like, oh, it's not real.
It's for someone else.
Yeah, just get over it, And had flown hundreds of times at this point, and we were on this flight. It was a red eye, and about an hour into the flight, and without any triggers at all, I just felt like the walls were closing in on me, and I couldn't get out of there, and I couldn't breathe. And from that day forward, I really have had a heart for people who experience this, because in a way it's uncontrollable, and it can be as drastic as that, or as just ubiquitous as just irritability, lack of concentration, and really pervade every area of your life. And so we know that Jesus offers us a better way to live. I don't want to hyper spiritualize this issue at all, because I'll be coming at it from a pastoral perspective, but we know that the Lord blesses us with therapists and clinicians and counselors to be able to walk you through this season of life if in fact you need more of that. And in fact, here at our church, a couple of months ago, we were fortunate to be able to open Central Care and Counseling, and Kristen's the director of that. And I want you to be sure that you know, if this is something you feel like you need, that you know exactly how to get it. So Kristen, tell us the process for essentially receiving treatment from the counseling center.
Absolutely, and I think that a lot of times the first step is the hardest. Clicking that button on the website and trying to figure out exactly what to do is the hardest step. So we're going to make it real easy for you. If you go to our website, firstridgeland.org, and you go over to the side and get the menu button, it'll drop down and have a counseling title there. You click on that, and it is all very easy to fill out. There's fill in the blanks there. There's our email address, our phone number, and you can submit that, and it comes directly to us, and we get back in touch with you and find a great counselor that's a good fit for you. And we treat everything from young to old, and anything from things that you're doing with your marriage and grief and sickness and anxiety. We've done divorces and affairs. We have every single thing available. So we have a whole host of counselors that are willing and ready to meet you where you're at.
Awesome. So make sure you go to firstridgeland.org/counseling if that's something you need. Listen, I know we started with the definition of anxiety, and I want to just kind of take that a little bit further, because as we were gathering together to put these couple of weeks together, I wanted us to be able to distinguish between worry and anxiety. Like, listen, how much is too much, essentially? Do I really have an issue? How do I know if I have an issue? And so I think, worry is more natural, but anxiety is what starts to affect our performance, our bodies, our health. And so I'm going to let Kristen just kind of walk us through the differences between worry and anxiety so that we'll be able to distinguish that over the next several weeks. Kristen?
Yeah. Worry, we're going to start there, and I think that all of us can admit that we've experienced worry at some point in our lives. These are things that are realistic concerns. I'm worried that I'm going to fail a test. I'm worried that my child's going to have a rough first day of kindergarten. Those are worries. These are things that it's a temporary state. It's not necessarily affecting your daily functioning. It's not debilitating. You're able to have the worry, move past it, and continue on with your daily functioning. It usually doesn't have any physical response. You're not having a difficult time breathing. You're not having, any sort of physical symptoms as a result of that worry. And going further to anxiety, anxiety is the excessive state of uneasiness that we discussed earlier. These do have physical symptoms. In counseling, we call these psychosomatic. You do feel it in your body. You feel rapid heart rate. You may be trembling. You may have difficulty sleeping. And anxiety really does interfere with daily functioning. You have trouble at work. You have trouble concentrating. You may have days where you call in sick because you truly can't find the time and the energy to get out of bed. I'm worried to leave my house. I cannot possibly think of going to the grocery store. These are excessive states of apprehension and uneasiness. And the other thing about anxiety is that it's usually not realistic concerns. We like to have the example of we can be worried that we're going to get fired from our job because we didn't perform well. We're anxious if we think we're going to get fired from our job because they didn't ask about my child's piano recital.
Got it.
It's some sort of disconnect with an unrealistic concern, and that's where anxiety stems from.
No, that's so awesome. And so if you're out there and like, oh, how do I distinguish worry from anxiety? Another one we talked about was this. It's like you're worried about going to a party because you don't know if you're going to have a good time. If it's just worry, you'll go anyway. Mm-hmm. If it's anxiety, it will impede your function, so you choose not to go. And so that's a kind of a good,
absolutely.
Hey, I'm worried about flying in an airplane, but I go and fly anyway. If it's anxiety, I can only travel in cars now.
Well, and anxiety seems to turn into one into the other. So I may be anxious about, step one, and step one works out. Well, then I become anxious about step two. Gotcha. Step two works out. And so it doesn't really promote, problem solving. Mm-hmm. It just continues to be this hamster wheel feel of emotion.
To almost like immobilization.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Awesome. No, that's good. So we're going to talk about maybe like what is the foundation for anxiety. It's really funny. I remember having a conversation with somebody one time, and I was like, no, wait a minute. You're not doing this because you think that these other people may or may not possibly think what you are hypothesizing about you. It was just kind of crazy, but it was a legitimate concern. And that's why anxiety is something we need to be able to identify and then just begin to release. Again, so listen, we're just helping ourselves to become familiar with what this is that's holding us back from the life Jesus offers us. And so just as a foundation for anxiety in the Bible, it's self-idolization. We believe we are the center of the universe in subtle and not so subtle ways. Mm-hmm. And we see this throughout the Gospels. So it's not new to our culture. I think it certainly hasn't gotten any better, but it's not new to our culture. We see throughout the Gospels the disciples continuing to ask Jesus, look, who is the greatest? They wanted to know who was the best. And finally in Mark 10, he's just like, look, the Son of Man came to seek and to save and to give his life as a ransom for many. And if you want to be first, you're going to have to be last. And if you want to be a leader, you're going to have to be the slave to all. So he kind of turns the whole thing on its head and really releases us from this intuition of being at the center of our own universes. And that is the foundation for anxiety. So if you hear us say one thing to help you identify this in your own life, is self-idolizing is the foundation for anxiety. Beginning to think about yourself in every potential situation and scenario, regardless, and then making decisions based on that not so realistic reality.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like at times it's waking up in the morning and think, what can happen? It will happen. And then worried about, well, what are they going to say? And you wake up every morning thinking about yourself.
Yeah.
And not always in I'm better than everyone way, right, but just I'm constantly thinking about how I'm going to function, how I'm going to get through this. And it's very self-idolizing, and it starts from the minute you get out of the bed.
Yeah, it really does. So none of us are, exempt from the temptation to think of ourselves first, and that's why Jesus said that in such a powerful way in Mark chapter 10. And so that's something we really want you to hang into tonight. Is that, one of the keys to overcoming this is to make sure you're not at the center of your universe and you're not getting any of the glory that Jesus deserves, and you are serving people. You are serving the people around you. That immediately takes you from being the common denominator in the equation, so to say. Listen, I want to share with you a video of a girl with a testimony about anxiety. Her name is Genesis. So let's take just a couple minutes and hear her story.
After graduating, I was able to get a job in my career field in New York City, the city where I wanted to be, and that I told my family, this is what I'm gonna do. We're gonna do this job in this great city, and this is what it's going to be. So I start working, and I'm like, I am here, I've made it, I'm in my field, this is awesome. As I kept going, I think my subconscious was like, you don't like it. This is not what you want to do, which caused me to have slip-ups and mess-ups. And I had painted this picture for myself of what it was supposed to be, and it wasn't adding up to that picture. I wasn't excelling at this job that I thought I wanted. I wasn't, blowing it out of the water. Knowing that everyone back home was rooting for me to be successful at this job and climb the ladder. I didn't want this to be the moment that I let them down. Work was kind of spiraling quickly out of control, and I was just so in my head about trying to make everything work and not, letting anyone in. I couldn't talk to anyone, conversations were tough. I really just can't go too much further past trying to keep up appearances in a way. In that time frame, I just had even more weight on me, and it just didn't come to fruition of me living up to, of me doing what I needed to do. And the next review period came, and I got laid off. After getting laid off, I just kind of felt like I wouldn't be who they thought I was. I felt in a sense, a failure. And I was like, well, if I think this about me, that clearly has to be what they're going to think, when I go to them with this. And so I kept it to myself. But then I got to a point where, I couldn't do that anymore, because I didn't want to keep being sad and being weighed down, just with my whole situation. One day I was, talking to my mom. I finally, just had to say, it didn't work. And here I am, and I no longer have a job. And in that moment, she was more just concerned about me and how I was. And it just kind of reaffirmed for me, I wasn't that job, and I wasn't that position, and I wasn't, my status at that time. As more people found out, I realized that I was holding on to this idea of, having to be, this perfect, polished person. In everyone's eyes, and even in God's eyes. I think that was when I realized they weren't expecting me to be anything that I had been putting on.
All right, so looking at Genesis' story, I think that really hits home for a lot of us. I feel like the weight that she's feeling is crushing her. And, we see how fast she ran to get to her goal, which was to live in New York City and to have this perfect job and to make this perfect life for herself. But the more affirmation she received from people, the faster she ran, and in the end, it actually got her nowhere. Mm-hmm. She waits to try and have every box checked and every single line finished that she has the perfect life, and she never actually gets there. And the more she thinks about this, she says in the video that her conversations were stalling. She didn't have the energy to continue on at work, and she eventually gets laid off. And she learns in the long run that running faster and working harder is not the answer. She eventually sees that pretending that she has all of those things is what's absolutely crushing her in the end. And the weight of that anxiety and that pretense that she has completely destroys her in the long run.
So true. And while your story may not be New York City or climbing the corporate ladder, I can guarantee you in some way in your life, you are pretending. And if there's another thing we want you to know today in this first week on anxiety, it's that pretending is the fuel for anxiety. There's nothing that causes anxiety to not only linger but to grow than us pretending in one of several ways. The first way is that we're just pretending that we're somebody we're not. You know, that we're stronger than we are, that we're better than we are, that our flaws aren't there, that we're perfect. And the issue is anxiety is the difference in who you're pretending to be and who you really are, because you become exhausted trying to make up that difference. Another way that we pretend is that we just pretend like our circumstances aren't really the way they are. Some people call that the ostrich effect, where we just kind of bury our head in the sand. I don't know about you, but I've gotten a speeding ticket a time or two, and they never really go away if you just throw them in a drawer. Okay, you got to like pay them. So we cannot pretend that our circumstances aren't the way they are. If you get the ticket, if something is insufficient in your life, the best thing to do is just recognize that for what it is. And the last way we pretend is we pretend as though the worst thing that can actually happen will actually happen. And nothing can be more debilitating than just, really, that's always assuming the worst. So think about those three ways that we pretend. And now that we know that pretending is the fuel for anxiety, I want you to do this before we get back together next week. I want you to do a pretend audit on your life. And I want you to ask yourself, listen, in what ways am I pretending to be somebody I'm not? In what ways am I pretending like my circumstances really aren't the way they are? In what ways am I pretending like the worst thing that can happen will actually happen? And I think that will be key to kind of getting us on this journey of overcoming anxiety. Thank you for joining us, First Ridgeland, and we'll see you back here next week.